My wife looked me dead in the eye at our own kitchen island, the marble cold between us, and said, "My brother needs your business contacts. Give him your client list or we're done." She just handed me a cup of coffee, my favorite mug. The steam was still rising. I took a slow sip, placed the cup down carefully on the granite, and said, "I respect your decision." The color drained from her face. She expected a fight, she expected begging, she expected me to crumble. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have calculated, was the existence of the ironclad prenuptial agreement my late father had begged me to sign, or the fact that her precious brother, the one she was willing to torch our marriage for, was already under federal investigation for fraud. A month later, her lawyer called me. Not with threats, not with demands. He called me, his voice tight with professional embarrassment, and he apologized. But before I tell you how it ended, how that apology sounded like the sweetest symphony I'd ever heard, I need to know something from you. Right now. Have you ever been given an impossible ultimatum by someone you loved? A my way or the highway demand that just broke something inside you? Did you give in or did you stand your ground? Drop your answer below. Because what happened next, the quiet fallout from those 7 words, "I respect your decision," changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the quiet power of having your ducks in a row. Let me rewind. Let me paint the before picture for you. My name is David. I was 47 years old when this all blew up, a man who believed truly and foolishly that he had built a quiet, good life. My business wasn't flashy. It was a boutique firm that sourced rare, specialty materials for high-end manufacturers. Think aerospace-grade composites, medical implant polymers, that kind of thing. My value wasn't in a factory. It was in my black book. 30 years of cultivating relationships with reclusive suppliers in Europe and Asia, building a reputation for discretion and reliability with clients who valued secrecy above all else. My client list wasn't a spreadsheet. It was my life's work, encrypted, compartmentalized, and worth more than my house, my cars, and my investments combined. It was my legacy. My wife, Clara, we'd been married for 12 years. She was beautiful, charismatic, the life of any party. I met her when I was still climbing, still sweating over every contract, and she brought a light into my too serious world. She came from a family that was different from mine. Where my father taught me about integrity and silent sweat equity, her family, the Millers, believed in the shortcut, the glamorous hustle. Her older brother, Leo, was the golden child, always driving the flashiest car on a loan he couldn't service, always talking about the next big deal. A salesman of smoke and mirrors, I never trusted him. I found his handshake too damp, his eye contact a fraction too brief. But he was family, Clara's family, so I tolerated him. I'd even, against my better judgment, steered a few low-stakes opportunities his way over the years which he'd invariably fumbled. Clara always made excuses for him. "He's just unlucky," she'd say. "He needs a real break." The peace before the storm looked like our anniversary dinner at the Grove just 6 months before the end. Clara was radiant. She reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "You've built something so amazing, David. It's time you enjoyed it more. Let's travel. Let's live." It felt like love. It felt like partnership. I squeezed her hand, thinking how lucky I was. What I didn't know was that the very next day she'd have lunch with Leo and he'd plant the seed. "David's sitting on a gold mine, sis," he must have told her. "Those contacts of his with my sales flair, we'd be unstoppable. It's a shame to keep that all to himself. Family should share, right?" The small acts of disrespect started subtly. Clara began questioning why I was so secretive about my work. "I'm your wife, don't you trust me?" she'd pout. Then it was, "Leo S. trying to turn over a new leaf, honey. He just needs one good client to get on his feet. You have hundreds." I'd explain calmly the confidentiality agreements, the non-disclosure contracts, the ethical and legal firewalls. It wasn't mine to give. It was a sacred trust. She'd wave a hand, dismissing a decade of my ethics as mere stubbornness. The tension became a third person in our home, sitting with us at breakfast, watching TV with us on the couch. Then came the betrayal, the tearing point. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just closed a complex deal with a client in Stuttgart, a deal that had taken 18 months of careful negotiation. I was feeling good, truly satisfied. I walked into the kitchen, humming, ready to suggest we order from her favorite Thai place. Clara was standing there, arms crossed. No hello. Leo was sitting at our island, a smug grin on his face, sipping my expensive scotch from a tumbler. David, Clara said, her voice like chilled steel. We need to talk. Leo's here because this involves him. He's launching a new venture, a consultancy. He needs a client base to get started. Leo leaned forward. Yeah, Dave, look, I don't need the super technical ones. Just give me the low-hanging fruit. The ones you're too busy to service properly. I was stunned. The audacity of him being in my home, drinking my liquor, and making this demand. Leo, I said, keeping my voice even. You know that's impossible. Every client has a strict NDA. It's not a matter of being busy, it's a matter of law and ethics. Clara stepped between us. Stop hiding behind lawyer talk, David. This is my brother. This is family. He needs this. I need you to do this for us. I can't, Clara. It would destroy my business. It would be professional suicide. There are legal repercussions. She cut me off, her voice rising, sharp enough to chip the marble. Your business, that's all you care about. Your precious lists, your secret little phone calls. What about this family? What about what I need? Leo is part of my life, which means he's part of your life. I tried reason. Clara, if I violate those NDAs, I could be sued into oblivion. We could lose everything. That's when she delivered the line that shattered 12 years of marriage. She looked at me not with anger, but with a cold, calculated disdain I'd never seen before. Then consider this, David. You have a choice. Your so-called ethics or your wife. Give Leo the client list, a full copy, encrypted of course. We're not savages, or I will file for divorce tomorrow. The room went silent. Leo had the decency to look at his shoes, but the grin was still tugging at his lips. I looked at the woman I loved, the woman I'd built a home with, and I saw a stranger, a negotiator, an adversary. She wasn't asking, she was extorting. She was weaponizing our marriage to loot my life's work for her brother's benefit. The emotional devastation was complete, but it was followed instantly by a cold, clear realization. She had just shown me exactly who she was. And in that moment, the hurt began its slow, inevitable freeze into something else, something determined. The silence after her ultimatum was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of a door slamming shut forever on the life I thought I had. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I just looked at her, at the hard set of her jaw, at Leo's smug, averted gaze, and I felt all the fight drain out of me. Not the fight for my marriage, that was clearly already over, but the fight to make them understand. They didn't want to understand, they wanted to win. I remember saying very quietly, "You can't be serious, Clara." "I have never been more serious," she fired back, not a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "It's a list of names and numbers, David. You're choosing a list over me." That's when I knew reasoning was futile. She had reframed my entire career, my integrity, as petty selfishness. I nodded slowly, a terrible calm settling over me. "I'll need to think," I said, my voice flat. "There's nothing to think about," Leo chimed in, finally finding his voice. "It's a simple yes or no, buddy." I ignored him. I looked only at Clara. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow." I left them standing in the kitchen. I went to my study, the one room in the house that was unequivocally mine, locked the door and sat in the dark. I wasn't crying. I was assessing. The emotional ruin was a given. But the financial ruin, the professional annihilation she was so casually threatening, that I realized with a jolt might not be so inevitable. Because in the bottom drawer of my old, battered filing cabinet, buried under years of tax returns, was a document I had all but forgotten. A document my father, a wise and cynical divorce lawyer himself, had made me sign 2 weeks before my wedding. "Son," he'd said, his voice gravelly with the cancer that would take him a year later, "you're a pragmatic man. Love is not pragmatic. This woman, she has a light in her eyes, but her family, they see a meal ticket. Protect what you've built for me." It was a prenuptial agreement, not just any prenup. It was a fortress. Drafted by my father's most ruthless colleague, it stipulated, in language so clear it was brutal, that any assets brought into the marriage, including my business and its proprietary assets, explicitly named as my client relationships and lists, remained solely mine. Furthermore, it had a clause I'd thought was morbidly funny at the time, a bad faith provision. It stated that if one party attempted to coerce, manipulate, or force the other into compromising a premarital asset for the financial benefit of a third party, specifically naming family members, and that action led to divorce, the offending party would forfeit all claims to spousal support and any contested marital assets. My father had seen the Millers coming from a mile away. I'd signed it to humor a dying man, and then I'd locked it away, hoping I'd never need it. Hope is a luxury for the naive. That was the legal shield. But the discovery, the hidden truth that turned my cold determination into a strategic, focused rage came an hour later. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was an old friend, Mike, who worked in the Financial Compliance Division of the State Attorney General's office. We played golf maybe twice a year. His text was uncharacteristically direct. "Hey, David. Heard some rumblings at work today. Might be nothing, but does the name Leo Miller mean anything to you? Came across my desk in a briefing. You're a smart guy, just be careful." My blood ran cold. I typed back, my fingers clumsy. "My brother-in-law, why?" Three dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again for a long time. His reply finally came. "Can't say much, but an active investigation is not a rumor. It's Fed level. Fraud, wire, securities, the whole 9 yards. It's not public, but it's real." I shouldn't have said this much. Delete this. I deleted the thread. I sat back in my chair. The pieces clicked together with an almost audible snap. This wasn't just Clara being manipulated by her brother. This was Clara, knowingly or not, acting as a front for a sinking man. Leo wasn't looking for a leg up. He was looking for a life raft, a fresh pool of reputable contacts to scam, to defraud, to use as camouflage while his house of cards collapsed. And my wife was demanding I hand him the keys to my clients' kingdoms, people who trusted me, which would make me an accessory to whatever he planned. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was now potentially criminal. The shift inside me was absolute. Despair evaporated, burned away by the pure oxygen of this new knowledge. This wasn't about saving my marriage. It was about ensuring the coming avalanche buried only the people who deserved to be under it. The plan formed in my mind not as a burst of inspiration, but as a slow, careful blueprint. I wasn't going to fight her. I wasn't going to argue. That's what she wanted. A dramatic battle where she could play the victim, where I'd be the stubborn villain denying her family. No, my revenge would be one of utter passivity. I would simply step aside and let the consequences of her own choices roll over her like a silent, unstoppable tide. I would be the calm in the center of the storm she chose to create. The next morning I went through the motions. I showered, dressed for work, made coffee. Clara was already at the island, her posture rigid, expecting my capitulation or my explosion. Leo, thankfully, was gone. I poured my coffee, took a slow sip, and met her gaze. "Well," she said, the single word sharp as a shard of glass. I placed my mug down. "Clara, what you're asking me to do is illegal. It would violate federal and international trade secrets laws and multiple contracts. It would destroy my business and open us up to catastrophic litigation. I cannot and will not do it." Her face flushed with triumph, as if I'd walked right into her trap. "So that's your final answer. You choose your clients over your wife." "I choose not to commit a felony," I said quietly. "I choose not to betray people who have trusted me for decades. If you cannot see the difference between that and choosing a list over you, then I don't know what to tell you." She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Then we're done. I'll have my lawyer contact you." There it was, the threat made real, and that's when I said the 7 words that began my revenge. I looked at her, my expression one of profound, almost sorrowful resignation. "I respect your decision, Clara." The triumph on her face faltered just for a second. She was waiting for the blow-up, the begging, the negotiation. My calm acceptance disarmed her completely. It transferred all the agency and all the coming consequences squarely back onto her shoulders. She had made the threat. I was simply acknowledging it. She blinked, collected herself, and with a curt nod walked out of the kitchen. An hour later, I heard the front door close and the sound of her car pulling out of the driveway. She was going to her lawyer. The script was in motion. My part now was not action, but preparation, and perfect inaction. I called my own attorney, a brilliant, ice-cold woman named Evelyn Ross who had handled my corporate affairs for years. I told her everything: the ultimatum, the demand for the client list, Clara's divorce threat. I emailed her a scanned copy of the prenuptial agreement. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "David," Evelyn said, her voice crisp with professional glee. "This is exceptionally clean. The bad faith clause is a masterpiece. She has just walked directly into it. Do not engage with her. Do not answer any calls or texts about reconciliation or negotiation unless they come from her legal counsel. Go about your business. Be a ghost. The less you do, the stronger our position becomes." I followed her instructions to the letter. I moved into a corporate apartment my company kept for visiting international clients. I told my assistant to screen all personal calls. I immersed myself in work, but with a new, secret purpose. I began a meticulous private audit. I reviewed every client file, every communication, ensuring there was no conceivable way Clara or Leo could have accessed any information. I had my IT guy, a loyal old friend named Raj who'd been with me since the beginning, run full forensic scans on all my systems and home networks. We found nothing compromised. Yet, meanwhile, I watched. Clara filed for divorce 3 days after our kitchen confrontation. The petition, which Evelyn forwarded to me with a snort of derision, was a work of fiction. It painted me as a cold, work-obsessed husband who had emotionally abandoned her, who valued money over family. It made no mention of the client list ultimatum, of course. It requested substantial spousal support, half of all marital assets, which her lawyer broadly defined to attempt to include the value of my business and possession of the house. It was a greedy, predictable document. Reading it didn't hurt. It just confirmed the character of the person I'd been married to. The next phase of the plan involved Leo. I couldn't expose the investigation. That would tip off the feds and potentially get my friend Mike in trouble. But I could make sure that when it did break, its connection to my situation was crystal clear. I had Raj, my tech guru, set up a simple, untraceable digital watch. Using only public records searches and business databases, nothing illegal, we began compiling a dossier on Leo's various ventures. The shell companies with no assets, the lawsuits from former partners buried in county court records, the liens on his properties. It was a portrait of a serial fraudster. We didn't do anything with it. We just had it ready, a truth bomb waiting for its fuse to be lit. The waiting was the hardest part. The divorce proceedings began, a slow, grinding process of discovery and depositions. Clara's lawyer, a slick fellow named Henderson, postured and threatened. He tried to subpoena my business records, trying to establish the marital value of my client relationships. Evelyn swatted him down like a fly, citing the prenup and filing motions for sanctions based on its bad faith clause. The legal battle became a tense, expensive stalemate, but the momentum was subtly shifting. You could feel Henderson's frustration growing. He'd taken what he thought was a simple case of a scorned wife and was running headfirst into a legal fortress. And then, the catalyst. It happened on a Thursday. I was in my temporary apartment, reviewing a deposition transcript, when a news alert flashed on my phone from the Business Tribune. The headline was short and devastating. Federal raid targets local consultancy, financier Leo Miller NAMED in fraud probe. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clicked the article. There were pictures, agents carrying boxes out of a sleek office downtown, the same office Leo had bragged about at our last agonizing family dinner. The article detailed a multi-million-dollar scheme targeting angel investors, allegations of forged financial statements, phantom products, and wire fraud. It quoted anonymous sources saying the investigation had been ongoing for over a year and that an indictment was imminent. The fuse was lit. The reckoning was no longer in my hands. It was in the hands of the United States Department of Justice, and it was about to collide in the most public way imaginable with my wife's divorce fantasy. The reckoning did not come with a bang, but with a series of silent, seismic tremors that collapsed their world from the inside out. The public execution of their greed wasn't on a stage with a gasping crowd, but in the sterile, humiliating arena of family court and the front page of the business section. The first tremor hit Clara directly. Her lawyer, Henderson, called Evelyn the morning after the news broke. Evelyn put him on speakerphone in her office with me sitting silently in a leather chair, listening. Evelyn, Henderson's voice was strained, all the slick confidence gone. Regarding the Miller situation, the news. What about it, Charles? Evelyn's voice was cool, polite. My client, Clara, she maintains she had no knowledge of her brother's legal troubles. I'm sure she does, Evelyn replied. However, our discovery motions have been seeking any and all communications regarding the defendant's demand that my client transfer proprietary business assets to Mr. Miller. Given this new, public information about Mr. Miller being the target of a federal fraud investigation, the court's view of those demands may shift from simple avarice to something far more serious. It raises questions of intent, don't you think? Potentially even conspiracy to misuse trade secrets for fraudulent purposes. There was a long silence on the other end. I could practically hear Henderson sweating. That's a dramatic interpretation, Evelyn. Is it? The U.S. Attorney's Office might find it a logical one. We would, of course, be obligated to share all relevant evidence, including deposition transcripts where your client explicitly ties the divorce threat to the surrender of those assets with any investigating authority that requests it. She let that hang in the air. The threat wasn't that we'd go to the feds, it was that we'd become a source they couldn't ignore. I think it's time we had a frank discussion about settling this matter, today, before the next motions hearing. That was the lever. The fear of being dragged into her brother's criminal morass, of having her own depositions picked apart by federal prosecutors, was the anvil. The actual hearing, when it came, was the hammer. We met in the judge's chambers a week later, a mandatory settlement conference. Clara was there, dressed in a severe black suit that did nothing to hide the pallor of her face. She wouldn't look at me. Her brother's picture was splashed across the local paper that morning, handcuffed and being led into a federal building. The indictment had been unsealed. Judge Wilkins, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for sniffing out bullshit from the bench, reviewed the prenuptial agreement, then looked at Clara and Henderson. "Counselor," she said to Henderson, "your client's position, as I understand it, is that she is entitled to spousal support and a significant portion of the marital estate." "Yes, Your Honor, based on the length of the marriage and her contributions as a homemaker." The judge held up a hand. She looked at Clara. "Mrs. Thorne, is it true that you presented your husband with an ultimatum to provide his confidential client list to your brother or you would file for divorce?" Clara shifted in her seat. "It wasn't an ultimatum, Your Honor. It was a discussion about helping family." "A discussion," the judge repeated flatly. She looked down at the prenup, tapping the specific clause. "The document you signed calls it coercion for the financial benefit of a third party. And this third party, your brother, is now under federal indictment for fraud." She looked back at Henderson. "You are asking me to ignore this agreement, to reward your client for conduct that not only violates its explicit terms but, in light of current events, suggests a shockingly poor and potentially legally hazardous judgment. Is that correct?" Henderson was floundering. "Your Honor, my client had no knowledge. Her knowledge of the investigation is irrelevant to the terms of this contract," Judge Wilkins interrupted. "Her actions are what's relevant. She made a demand. He refused, citing legal and ethical constraints that appear in hindsight to be not just prudent but prophetic. She then initiated divorce proceedings. The bad faith provision is triggered. It is exceptionally clear." She turned to Evelyn. "What is your client's settlement proposal?" Evelyn didn't even look at her notes. "Mr. Thorne will keep all premarital assets, including his business and its goodwill. He will assume the mortgage on the marital residence, which is only in his name, and Mrs. Thorne will vacate within 30 days. He will retain all investment and retirement accounts opened prior to and during the marriage, as they were funded solely by his income from his separate property business. In lieu of alimony, he offers a one-time payment of $50,000 to assist with her transition, which he is under no legal obligation to provide. That is the proposal." Clara gasped, a sharp, wounded sound. "That's nothing, that's punitive." Judge Wilkins looked at her. "Based on the agreement you signed, Mrs. Thorne, it is generous." If this goes to a full trial, given the evidence of your demand and its connection to a now indicted individual, I would likely enforce the forfeiture clause in its entirety. You would receive nothing. Not the car, not the jewelry you purchased with marital funds, nothing. Your husband's offer allows you to walk away with some dignity and capital. My strong advice is to take it. That was the moment. The public execution. It wasn't in a boardroom with a gasping crowd, but in a quiet judge's chamber under fluorescent lights. The power dynamic had utterly inverted. Clara, who had held the axe of divorce over my head, was now being offered a life raft she didn't deserve, and being told by a robed authority figure that it was more than she had a right to. The humiliation was absolute. She was a supplicant, not a victor. Her grand play for my wealth had ended with a charity handout and a federal indictment hanging over her family. She looked at me then, finally, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrific understanding. She wasn't seeing the stubborn husband she could bully. She was seeing the man who had built a trap she never knew existed and who had just watched her walk into it. She gave a single, stiff nod to Henderson. The fight was over. She had lost everything. The aftermath was not swift, but it was thorough and quantifiable, a slow, grinding wheel of justice turning exactly as it should. The legal and karmic bills came due with precise, satisfying numbers attached. For Leo, the consequences were printed in black and white on a federal docket. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of securities fraud to avoid a longer trial. The sentencing hearing was 6 months later. He was ordered to pay restitution of $2.7 million to his victims. Since he had no assets that weren't already liens or illusions, that debt would follow him to the grave. He was sentenced to 87 months in a medium-security federal prison. 7 years and 3 months of his life gone. His consultancy was a hollow shell, a name on a lawsuit. His reputation was ashes. The golden boy of the Miller family was now inmate 45,892-83. For Clara, the consequences were a quieter, deeper ruin. She signed the settlement agreement. The one-time payment of $50,000 was gone within a year, spent on a new apartment she could barely afford and legal fees for her own brother's doomed defense. The bad faith clause held firm, a legal monument to her error. She received no spousal support, not a penny. The house, the cars, the investments, all remained mine. The jewelry she'd collected over the years. Much of it was purchased with funds from our joint account, which was funded by my business income. Under the prenup's punitive terms, Evelyn argued successfully that those were marital assets subject to forfeiture. Clara was allowed to keep the pieces that were unequivocal gifts, but the most valuable items were sold, the proceeds absorbed into the estate she had no claim to. The social consequences were even more brutal. Our mutual friends, once the scene of her triumphant parties, split. Many saw the news about Leo, heard the whispers about why we'd really divorced, and drew their own conclusions. The woman who was once the vibrant center of every gathering became a ghost at them, an object of pity and quiet judgment. She had to move to a different part of the city, a practical necessity that also felt like an exile. The final blow, the one that truly cemented the aftermath, was the call from her lawyer. Not the settlement conference, but a private call to Evelyn, which she relayed to me with a wry smile. "Henderson called," she said. "He was contrite. He said to tell you, and I quote, 'Please extend my apologies to Mr. Thorne. I was operating on information provided by my client which appears to have been materially incomplete. It was a difficult situation.' He was apologizing." Her own lawyer was apologizing to me for her behavior. That was the ultimate signature on her defeat. It meant the professional in the room, the one paid to fight for her, had looked at the facts and the law and found her position not just weak, but morally and legally untenable. It was the white flag of her entire campaign. My redemption, my new life, began in the silence they left behind. The first thing I did was sell the house. It was just a beautiful shell filled with the echo of that final conversation. I bought a modern loft downtown with panoramic views, a space that was entirely, uncompromisingly mine. I filled it with books and art I loved, not decor chosen to impress. The business, freed from the shadow of that existential threat, didn't just survive, it flourished. With the mental and emotional energy I'd once spent navigating a failing marriage, I pursued 2 new supplier contracts in Scandinavia. I landed them both. My revenue increased by 40% in the 18 months following the divorce. The clients, the ones I had protected, seemed to sense a renewed focus. Their trust deepened. I hired 2 new junior associates, mentoring them not just in business, but in the ethics that had saved me. I built a company culture on transparency and integrity, the very antithesis of the Miller worldview. I found peace, not in grand gestures, but in small, quiet victories. A Saturday morning with no drama, a business decision made without a toxic second guess. The profound relief of knowing my legacy was secure and that it would go to someone worthy, not plundered by a fraudster. I saw Clara once, about 2 years later, in a department store. She was looking at handbags, her face thinner, her posture less assured. She didn't see me. I felt no anger, no glee. Just a distant, quiet pity and a profound gratitude that I was no longer tied to that sinking ship. She had chosen her blood and it had drained her dry. I had chosen my principles and they had built me a fortress. The moral of the story isn't complex, but it's hard-earned. What I learned was this: God doesn't like ugly, and ugly isn't just violence or shouting. Ugly is a wife using her love as a bargaining chip. Ugly is a brother seeing family as a resource to be mined. Ugly is the belief that shortcuts trump integrity. The universe has a way of balancing the books. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't about striking back. It's about having the foresight to build a door for them to hang themselves on, and then having the strength to let them walk through it. My father's prenup wasn't a lack of faith in my marriage. It was faith in the unshakable value of what I had built with my own 2 hands. In the end, the law and the truth weren't just on my side. They were the same thing. So I'll ask you, because your thoughts matter in this community we're building. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who confused love with ownership? Have you ever been given a choice that was no choice at all? What would you have done standing in my kitchen, with your life's work being held for ransom? Tell me your story in the comments. Your experience might be the wisdom someone else needs to hear tonight. If this story of standing up for what's right, of quiet preparation winning over loud demands, resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. You're not just subscribing to a channel, you're joining a community that believes in justice, in building fortresses of integrity for a rainy day. Stories like this of ordinary people facing extraordinary tests are waiting for you every week. Stay strong, build your fortress, and remember, sometimes the most powerful word you can say to a bully isn't no. It's "I respect your decision. Good night."